Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy who came from the shallow end of the gene pool. In this video, we're breaking down the latest episode of Better Call Saul. After last week's massive time jump that took us to the days of Breaking Bad, we get a further one in this entry with us shooting right up to the aftermath of it with Jimmy under his new identity gene. The entire episode is in black and white, and I've always kind of viewed this as being for a symbolic reason when we're dealing with Gene. Sure, it's to differentiate between the past and present, whereas normally in other shows and movies they might flip this round, having the future scenes colour graded like this creates a very binary presence. Gone are the colourful suits and over-the-top personality of Jimmy, and it's been filled with this very monotone, low-key lifestyle that he's now having to live. Even though he's free, Gene clearly isn't happy, and throughout the seasons we've got the sense of paranoia and longing. In this episode we see as the slick-talking Saul starts to return and the con man is back in full effect. Hints of this are even given to us in a brilliant scene in which Jimmy shows he's got a passion for fashion with a snazzy tie and shirt combo. Now this has to be patent because it's all in black and white, and if it was just coloured we wouldn't be able to see this, so nice attention to detail there. Also, I'm probably going to be using Saul, Jimmy and Gene interchangeably, but you know who I mean, yeah, please don't butcher me in the comments. Either way, we are going to be diving into it all, but if you enjoy the video, I'd massively appreciate the thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe for breakdowns like this every day. Out of the way, thank you for clicking this, now let's get into Better Call Saul. Now the episode is heavily centered around Jeff, the cab driver who has appeared in earlier flashbacks.
My name is Jeff.
Back in season 4 episode 1 after Gene left hospital, he got picked up in Jeff's cab. His mother Marion at one point mentions famous people Jeff had in his taxi, one of which was Sammy Hagar, and she and Jimmy proceed to sing I Can't Drive 55, calling back to this ride. Now Gene noticed an Albuquerque Isotopes air freshener, and after recognizing him, it seemed like the walls were closing in on Jimmy. The air freshener once more returns in this entry when we see Jeff returning home from work. Cut to episode 1 of season 5, and Jeff approached Gene in the mall whilst he was on a break. Recognizing him, he brought in his menacing mate, who I'll send after you if you don't subscribe, and he did his catchphrase after finally dropping the act. In Magic Man, Gene vowed to fix his situation himself, and we see the resolution of this in this entry. Now someone clearly fixed Jeff's face, as he's a completely different actor. This was apparently due to contractual obligations, and let me know below which Jeff you prefer. Now we begin with Marion, who is introduced with this line.
Can I give you a hand?
If I needed a hand, I'd ask for it. Thank you very much.
She of course ends up needing a hand later on, so this is a great way to set up how slick Jimmy is, as he's able to even penetrate the hardest shell in Marion. Now she tries some schnauz forms, which have dips next to them, and I don't know, kinda reminded me of the German chip and dip stuff from Breaking Bad. Thank you for not turning off the video for that reach if you're still with me, and on her way home, Marion gets stuck in the snow. This is the first part of the con, as we discover that she travels on this route regularly, and that the snow wasn't to that level when she came out earlier. Jimmy is enacting the first part of his plan, attempting to seem sympathetic by hanging up missing dog ads on a tree. He puts up several of his poor puppy Nippy and tells a story about how he got lost in the snow and hasn't been seen since. Now we're back to reaching, but I think Jimmy told this story to plant the idea in Marion's head that the same thing could happen to her. After cutting her brakes, Gene pushes her all the way home, and we discover that she's Jeff's mother after a great title sequence. Last episode ended with Saul putting down the world's greatest lawyer coffee mug, which he had now symbolically attained due to Kim leaving. Throughout the series he carried a flask with second greatest lawyer on it, but this changing over for the Breaking Bad stuff symbolized how it was now just him. The tape footage also ends up stopping, which metaphorically shows us the law firm is at an end. Now we cut to Jeff coming home to see Saul shacking up with his mother. We learn that this entire episode is basically about Jimmy setting up Jeff to be a criminal so that he can't snitch on him because he could potentially go to jail too. I love this line early on from Marion, and that of course has a double meaning to it.
Don't worry, hon. He's not an axe murderer. If he was going to chop me to bits, he'd have done it already. Right, Gene?
Jimmy is obviously on the run for being a criminal mastermind, and I love the way this line makes Jeff feel even more afraid that he doesn't really know who he's dealing with. Also, I've kinda always thought that the design of Gene was meant to be based on BTK, who, like Jimmy, was hiding a dark secret under the guise of being a mild-mannered looking man. Now it's third time. So I actually think that Marion might end up being the one who tells the police about Gene. Towards the end of the episode, she talks about how Jeff fell in with a bad crowd all the way back in Albuquerque. Something terrible must have happened and the pair got scared, and Jeff ended up moving out with his mama to Bel Air. Now, I think Marion might end up finding out about the crime that the pair committed together, and being worried the Albuquerque situation could happen once more, she might tell the police. I believe that the second Jeff recognized him that his days were numbered, and I don't think the resolution of this entry is as simple as him now being off the hook. Let me know your thoughts below, but that's the end of your time. Now the pair take out the trash together, and Jimmy correctly guesses that Jeff wants in the game. Similar to Jimmy, he probably also misses his life back in Albuquerque, and the bad crowd likely lured him in with the same things that are promised to him here. He probably also regrets having to flee and wants some excitement back in his life, which leads to him being tempted by one of the biggest bad boys out there. Now Jimmy is still clearly paranoid too, and that night we see as he returns home and puts on his police radio. Now this could be to see whether Jeff's contacted them, but due to the way it's set up, I can imagine that it's a daily routine. He's likely constantly listening out for whether the police are going to come to his door, and I can imagine this will be something that plays into the finale. Now he also ends up digging out a shoebox of his old belongings, and he puts on Marco's ring, which he then wears for the rest of the entry. This belonged to his old partner in crime, and throughout the series, it's been something that he's fiddled with before either making a dangerous or important decision. It being put on back here shows that the con is on, and that Saul might be gone, but he's not forgotten. He packs up some Cinnabons and goes to the security guard office under the guise of thanking them for calling the EMTs after he fainted. We see that the main security guard Frank is played by Jim O'Hare, who you might recognise as playing Gary in Parks and Rec. Jimmy has worked out when the other does his checks, and with Frank being a bit of a plump figure with a hot daughter, he's the one that Jimmy can use the Cinnabon to control. He times how long it takes to eat, and this gives him a rough idea of how long Jeff has to boost them all later on. He even bullshits his way through the game's small talk and makes it a regular occurrence. We also see the SG was here carving, and after all these visits, he clocks up an average duration of how long he has Frank's attention for. The music that we hear over the top of this scene also pulls from the original Mission Impossible TV show, giving this a heist-type feeling as we watch all the pieces fall into place. Slowly he builds a rapport with the security guards, and by the end of it he's their best friend, miming playing football with them and talking about the game. Saul is clearly back, and the suit scene cements this. He counts paces, and we saw something similar with Gus back in episode 5 when he set things up with the gun. Now this allows him to create a layout of the entire mall floor so that Jeff can run through it. I actually love heist movies and shows, and watching the pieces fall into place for this was great in my opinion. Now at the moment, the general vibe I've seen is that this is a bit of a filler episode. I think it was pretty important to show how Gene was going back to being Saul. I think this will have consequences for later on, and can imagine that either the security guards or Marion end up discovering who he is. Now we also get this nod to Walter White.
50-year-old high school chemistry teacher comes into my office. The guy is so broke, he can't pay his own mortgage. 1 year later, he's got a pile of cash as big as a Volkswagen.
That night a crate is dropped off at the store, and this has the number 19683AE35, which I believe is a nod to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Kathy ends up holding the box overnight, and we discover that Jeff is inside of this. Gene then goes to the security room, and we see that his blagging of sport has now turned into actual knowledge. He's clearly studied the game just to pull off this cod, and it's always great seeing the Jimmy/Saul persona back. Jeff makes his move, but he ends up tripping in the middle of the store, which leads to the tensest scene in this entry. Now, all the items he steals are of course expensive clothes, and these are things Jimmy wore in his previous life. However, he's had to hide them and be humble due to being on the run, but clearly he has this longing for them. Maybe not the high heels, but yeah, lots of items like this. Now they only end up stealing 3 articles each so that it won't arouse suspicion amongst the stock takers. I love how Jeff also has a little rhyme here that he mutters to remind him of what order to do the job in. Anyway, with Jeff passed out, Gene ends up breaking down to buy time, but he actually talks about himself. He goes over how his brother is dead and how he lost his wife. This sadness comes from a genuine place, and it buys Jeff time to Sorry about that. Either way, it buys Jeff time to get out. Now we learn that the tapes get erased every 72 hours as well, and the crate is getting picked up in the morning, so the job is a go. Jimmy once more has a panic attack though, and it's a very touching moment. Now Jeff hides out in the toilets, and that morning he leaves when the general public come in. Jeff smirks about it, but this mutually assured destruction has a darker side to it, with Jimmy saying we're done. This of course calls back to Breaking Bad when he tried to say the same thing to Walt and got this response.
We're done when I say we're done.
Either way, after all that, a happy ending, and back at work, Gene has a spring in his step. He returns to the scene of the crime, creates an outfit Saul would wear, and though he leaves us hanging up, the thrill he experienced this episode might be too tempting not to return to. And that closes things out, and I do feel like the pieces set up here will return at some point to have bigger consequences. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, so make sure you comment below and let me know. We are running a competition right now and giving away 3 copies of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness on the 15th of August, and all you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episode. We pick the comments at random at the end of the month, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at HeavySpoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of the latest Westworld episode, which will be linked on screen right now. Lots of stuff to talk about in it, things that you've probably missed, let's be honest mate, you missed them. So definitely head over there right after this. Out of the way, thanks for sticking through the video, I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.